Hello, everyone. Good morning. We've got a great couple of panelists here up here on the stage that it's a lot of fun for me to be sitting here with. So we're obviously running a little bit over time, but we've got a lot to cover, so we're gonna go pretty quickly. We will reserve some time at the end for questions, so start to tabulate those as those come to you, and we'll have plenty of time to get to those. We were listening to the previous conversation where I think it was said that the chief digital officer, the knock on those is that they are high-paid navel gazers. So with that kind of an intro, maybe we can dive right in. I mean, I think it would be really helpful just to level set everyone here. If Sri, maybe you could start off and explain really kind of what it is that you do, what your charter is at the Met. You're the first chief digital officer there, so what are they bringing you on to do?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be back here at the CDO Summit. I should say that Perry had a wonderful response to that line about highly paid navel gazers. She said, as people work in nonprofits, we're low-paid navel gazers. And I'm just delighted to be here, and I want to congratulate David and his team for pulling together this two-day summit this year. Last year, I was sitting here, I was working at Columbia University, and I met my future boss at this event. So that's why when David says, come, I have to be wherever he asked me to go. I worked at Columbia University for 21 years, teaching journalism and digital media. And when I had this opportunity to work at the Met, I took that on as a fascinating new challenge. I had grown up a few blocks from the Met. I went to school 1 block from the Met at PS6. And so I tell people I had a 30-year one-way love affair with the world's greatest museum. And when someone loves you for 30 years and they call you, you got to take the call. And then with your wife's permission, carry on, and which is what we did. And that's how I ended up here. What we're doing at the Met is trying to tell the story of the world and the history of art through our objects. And we're building what we call a kind of virtuous circle between the physical museum and the digital space, the in-house and the online. And we're doing that through a variety of ways. One is just getting the stories of the objects told. But we're also trying to use technologies that all of you who are not in our space, but you use social, video, mobile, and trying to change an industry that has, in many ways, been very slow to change, in part because museums are very careful places. They're there to safeguard history, and they're not necessarily the ones who are going to be at the bleeding edge of technology. At the same time, our customers and our users and visitors are at the cutting edge of technology, so we have to be there with them. And I'm sure we'll talk more about some of the things we're doing.
Perfect. Perry, how about you? Let's give those folks a sense of what it is that you're tasked with there.
So I was lucky to be early to the web and worked, in publishing companies and in software companies, helping them think about how are they going to use this weird digital thing. I remember being at Lotus Development in the mid-1990s and having a huge fight with the ad director because I wanted to put this ugly thing called a URL on all their collateral, like on the print, and he said, well, it's not going on any of the signage, I'll tell you that now, sweetheart. So really helping institutions think about what this brave new digital world means for them, not only from a marketing lens, but from a how do they run their day-to-day business lens. So I came to Harvard, again, an institution which I attended and I had a great deal of affection for. It didn't occur to me that Harvard would be a great place to build a forward-looking digital strategy, but I didn't realize at the time I was joining a 377-year-old startup. So it's been a great atmosphere for helping the university think about not only digital, I love that you started with telling a story, because Harvard is a brand that we all have a story about, whether we've attended it, whether we've stepped on their campus, in the media, whether it's an episode of 30 Rock that talks about Boston or an offhand joke in the first 2 minutes of Gravity. People have an idea of what Harvard is. So part of our mandate is to think about how do we use digital strategy and digital technologies to make Harvard relatable and relevant in the digital sphere, to make Harvard, even for those who won't attend or may not ever set foot on campus, have a piece of it and understand why Harvard exists in the world. So that's a big part of our role there.
Sri, you were, this time last year, you were still in the education realm, and have obviously since, I think you went there in August, was it?
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about some of the differences that you're seeing now with 6 or so months under your belt in the arts space versus the education
Sure,
space?
I'll start with the kind of similarities.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of, Perry and I still talk we used to talk a lot more when I was in the education space, but we still talk a lot. I think the similarities are that the nonprofit is this, similar background, and then education. In a way, a place like the Met is in the education space. We have more than 350,000 New York City and tri-state area students who come to the museum on formal programs, not counting my kids coming with me to the museum, things like that. So those are ways in which they're similar. I would say close attention to resources is something that we're also we have to be very careful about as a nonprofit. Not that for-profit businesses aren't careful, but even places that to the outside look like big institutions are very careful and have to be. And our board and others are very, very careful about budgets and things like that.
And also, I think older institutions struggle with the both-and problem. We're not getting rid of Harvard's campus or the physical. Those are our greatest assets.
Right.
But digital for us, we're not a digital-first business. We're a both-and business, and that's a big mind shift for those in nonprofit.
Absolutely right. The ways in which it's different is that at a university, you have these students who are, you're making a case for a $40,000, $50,000 a year education. At the Met, we're making a case that you have to come and spend 3 hours with us. And it might seem like it's an easier case to make, but not always, right? So that's part of the challenge that we have at the Met. The other thing is that what we are trying to do is we have to cater to a wider range of folks who come in terms of demographics, in terms of age, in terms of comfort with technology, and you have to make them all feel like they are going to be comfortable and welcome at the museum. Online, we have to deal with a much broader range of languages and cultures. When we put up a product that has 10 languages, that's great, but even that is such an effort for us to do, and you have the whole world to be, you have to make it accessible to the whole world. So those are some of the ways in which it's different. That's
great, and I imagine if it's really thought that the 3-hour kind of Met experience is really kind of meant to be the key experience, I would imagine that part of what you're trying to do digitally is in some ways kind of break that up, where you could give someone a 3-minute experience or something like that. And how is introducing that concept or equating that value, is that something that you're working on?
Yeah, our team is working on that all the time. We have for a couple of years now done projects that are very short. You can imagine a place like the Met, we're used to doing kind of long documentaries about our art, but I'd love for all of you to check out a project called 82nd and 5th, which is the address of the Met. But it's also the name of our series that we put together of 100 short videos, one piece of art, one curator, 2 minutes. And we just finished 100 episodes, and we tell people now that you've watched House of Cards, now you can binge watch 82nd and 5th. And you're exactly right, this idea that you don't have to give people 3 hours, you can give them 2 minutes. And the other challenge is getting them to think of the Met when they may not be museum people. So how do you get your content in places that otherwise wouldn't be thinking of you?
Interesting. So you're at an arts organization with an educational kind of mission. You're in an educational organization with some art connection there as well. How do you see those connection points between the arts, which is part of the schools, obviously, that you're helping to oversee in the digital realm, with some of what Shri is talking about?
I think what Shri and I both share is to belong to institutions with an unbelievable amount of assets that can be leveraged digitally and shared digitally in a far more broader way than they were before. I think places with great physical campuses like the Met and like Harvard tend to think, come to our institution, experience us as we like to be experienced. We have a long track record of being successful with that kind of framing. But I think Shri's project is a terrific example of how we need to think a little differently about bringing arts and culture to you. We have our art museums reopening after several years of renovation in November of this year, and I know a lot of thought is going into not only digital displays within the museums, but how do we bring all these assets which in the case of the Met as well, not all can be surfaced at the same time. You know, it's a little bit like an iceberg, most art museums, where what you see on display is just the tip of what exists, you know, in the basements, you know, carefully husbanded in, you know, temperature-controlled rooms. So how can we share the most of that and be flexible to how people want to consume content? It's tough to get anyone, I'm sure, a curator at the Met or a faculty member of Harvard, to reduce anything to a 2-minute summary.
Sure.
I mean, that's the big challenge. These are people who have devoted their lives to excellence and depth, and we want to be accessible without being facile. We want to make digital additive without subtracting from the tremendous in-person experience.
Yeah, that's certainly an issue that we've dealt with at HBR as well, where the corner of the realm for us had been historically a 5,000-word article, and how do you get it down into these different, more accessible bites while preserving that quality?
But I think you've done that. You've done a really good job at HBR with that.
Yep.
That it's become, you know, you don't expect necessarily you wouldn't have expected HBR to be a player in this world where a lot of shorter but more accessible content is available, and you've done a really good job with that.
Thank you. Perry, back to you. A couple years ago, you were interviewed by Forbes, where you talked about the power of individual voices versus institutional voices, particularly in the realm of social media. Obviously, you both, but Perry, let's talk with you first. Work for very, very large institutions. In the context of telling stories and getting the message out about these institutions, have you found ways to use those individual voices versus an institutional one? Can you talk about kind of how in your role you've sought to kind of educate the institution around that?
There was a terrific piece actually at HBR talking about this idea of a third wave of social media, where you're not, I think when, I arrived at Harvard and started forming a team back in 2009, 2010, it was very much about setting up the channels, finding the voice, and anointing the few. Who are the people who are going to communicate through and as Harvard through these channels? But as more and more people become social media users, including our faculty, we're doing some thinking about, at what point do we empower people to tell stories? And people are going to tell stories no matter what you do, and that's the beauty of social media. Yep. That's what you want. We're not in the control business. We're in the empowerment business. Yep. But how do we get better at being in the empowerment business? Yep. We've taken some good early steps around tools, around training, around partnering with faculty, and really information sharing through social. I always think our social media strategy has sort of been the Trojan horse of collaboration across Harvard.
In what way?
In that we work with people who manage social accounts, both faculty, staff, and institutional, across the university for events like the Nobels, for events like commencement, for events like this weekend we have 2,200 admitted freshmen visiting campus. So the ability to convene people around these important institution-wide moments, like, of course, most importantly, the Capitol campaign right now, has been an opportunity to connect people in ways that you wouldn't otherwise imagine. Once those people are then connected, online and offline, you have an opportunity to leverage the nodes in your network, which is powerful.
Yeah. How about you? We talked a little bit about social media as it relates to the Met. How are you using? I think you've got a couple full-time staff there.
Right. We have 2 people doing social media full-time at the Met. We have we're on all the big platforms. But one of the things that we have this kind of legacy that for 30 years the Met spoke with one voice, and that was Philippe de Montebello, the director. And when Tom Campbell came in 5 years ago as our director and CEO, he started having more voices speak for the institution. I think universities have been much better at having different voices because faculty were used to being public speakers, for many of them being rock stars, and curators and conservators who are very careful folks who are very knowledgeable weren't necessarily given the leeway to speak publicly beyond specific conferences, things like that. So that's been different. But I can give an example of how an organization like ours can partner with folks who have expertise, but then amplify that, which is what we're trying to do with social media. We do a lot on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and we have 1 million followers on Facebook and things like that. But it turned out that a major market for us was being blocked off, and that was China, because they don't allow these networks. So we obviously wanted to be on Weibo, which you might know, Weibo, which is the big Chinese network, pronounced Weibo, which where we'd want to be if you want to reach the Chinese audience. But we didn't have Chinese speakers on our social media team. So we partnered with our Asian art department to build our first Weibo platform, and we called it a pilot project. And at a museum, you can get a lot done if you call it a pilot project. And we did about 40 postings in 4 months, and we had 1 million viewers of those posts. Wow. And Weibo has great analytics built into it. And so that's an example where you've got to take the people in the digital media team don't have the art skills necessarily, but we have the knowledge on how to amplify it when we can work on things like that.
That's great. I want to ask one more question about your roles, specifically both of you within your institution, then talk about the role of the Chief Digital Officer more generally. So Shri, not long after you joined the Met, you talked with the Times where you said that you called the role of the Chief Digital Officer kind of the Chief Listening Officer. So I'm just curious to hear kind of what have you heard in your role as you've done, I guess, kind of a listening tour to really understand the lay of the land. What are some of the pain points or just some of the things generally that you've heard in that
Sure. What I mean by the Chief Listening Officer is that you have to work across the board, not just with you're managing your team, but you're working with people across the institution. And that means everyone from development to the curators and others. And so part of listening is helping, first hearing what their issues are, but also giving them new ideas for ways in which they can do a more efficient and better job of what they're doing, because they're not used to necessarily looking at what's out there because they're concentrating on their areas of expertise. So that's something that we've done. I also want to underline the importance of the Chief Technology Officer at a place like the Met. He and I, his name is Jeff Spar, he and I work very closely together to make sure that we're able to do what we need to do. The digital media department couldn't do what it needs to do, and neither could the technology team if we didn't work together.
Okay. How about you, Perry, in terms of, does that resonate with you, the notion of kind of a Chief Listening Officer? Is that a part of your role there?
Yeah, I think listening, bringing the outside in, which Shri said, I think is really important, to think about I think there's a temptation when you're in a very strong vertical, whether that's an arts vertical or an education vertical, where you think, we're the Met, what's MoMA doing? What's the Tate doing? We're Harvard, what's Stanford doing? What's Yale doing? But really breaking that open and helping people understand that the competitors for digital attention, especially in the world of the cloud where, businesses, your competitors can rise up overnight, may be very different than your traditional, competitive analysis delivered to you by a strategy consulting firm. So what we try to do is listen outside in to say, what's not only the chatter about Harvard, but what are the trends, what's going on, across the board that's competing for people who are interested in learning, which I would submit, just as Nike defines an athlete as anyone with a body, Harvard defined, education as a necessity for anyone interested in learning. So it's a pretty broad definition. So I think helping identify what are the trends, bringing them back, what are the engagement strategies to meet our goals? I mean, I believe really strongly that if you come in just to be digital, then you are that overpaid navel gazer, and you're adding no value to the institution. But there's an element of, and I despise this phrase generally, but you'll know what I mean when I say it, but of growth hacking, of what are the areas in which Harvard as an institution, higher education institutions know they need to continue to excel, and that's certainly in attracting the best students, attracting the best faculty members, and in sharing their knowledge with the world.
So let's expand the conversation more broadly to the role of the Chief Digital Officer, and this is a panel that's talking about that role specifically in the frame of the arts and education. Obviously, you guys speak with a lot of other fellow CDOs in different industries. Are there things that you think are really important or different about the role of the Chief Digital Officer in arts and education versus in the private sector in a publicly traded company? What do you hear, and what do you see as kind of things that might be a different requirement in your world?
I think the building of relationships. I think it's important in all large institutions and all sort of corporations, certainly. But I think it's life or death if you're at a place, like in arts or education, because you do not have the command and control, nor would you want it. You don't want your curators, reporting centrally and thinking more about, reporting lines and, approval systems than they're thinking about the depth of what they do. And similarly with faculty, they're, freestanding. So I think the ability to build and nurture relationships across an institution, and also to build relationships beyond the institution, because you're not going to walk in with a GE-sized budget to work with a small startup, but to find a way that you can partner in a way that's beneficial to both parties that lets at least Harvard take advantage of some of the cutting-edge technologies out there without writing the giant check.
I'd say the same thing, and in addition, the people who have a role to play in your success aren't necessarily in your reporting structure, because these faculty members can at any point kind of be critical and have a voice about you, even though they have nothing to do with what you're doing. That's something that happens in the nonprofit world. And of course, the role of a board of trustees to kind of oversee is much greater than even in a corporation when it comes to kind of digital stuff.
I think you said that are there like 100 curators or something?
There are 100 curators and 100 conservators.
And those are all stakeholders in a lot of the decisions you make.
They are, and in fact, somebody said to me that you'll never get 100 curators to do new things, and I said, we can't handle 100 curators doing new things. All we want is a few people who want to do experiments, want to try new things, and let's see what happens.
That's great.
I think you also have other stakeholders that are hugely invested in, Harvard despises this phrase, but the brand, the entity. So in my case, one of the key audiences our group faces is, 375,000 worldwide alumni. And they all feel a strong stake in, what the admissions video looks like, and how you deliver a mobile app, and what kind of news is shared, and what level of timeliness, and do you do snackables versus 5,000-page articles. So I think finding ways to harvest the great minds that are out there for their ideas, both for their genuine ideas and also for their buy-in, is an important part of any CDO role.
Sure. Do you think that the CD role, from your vantage point, is one that's growing? I know there's some surveys taping right now, but where do you see the role of the CDO evolving in organizations, either within the arts and education or more broadly?
Well, in the arts world, it's certainly, the title. What I found is that CDO means different things in different places. Even within education, when we were comparing notes first, we were doing different things, though I think they were coming more together. In the world of the arts, we're seeing more organizations having a digital strategy person or somebody with a CDO-like title. That's certainly growing. In some places, they're so small, even though they're big institutions, that the CDO and the CTO are the same person. But otherwise, there's certainly more interest now than before.
So within the arts, you see it as kind of growing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perry, within education or more broadly, how do you?
Within education, I see it growing because you have a lot of institutions that have been around for a tremendous amount of time. But in general, I see it as sort of a catalytic and transitory role. I don't know what the next title will be, whether it will be more baked into the CMO job, more baked into the CEO job. But I do, Sri and I joke about it being a chief telephone officer. At what point is digital so much baked into the DNA of an institution that we don't need to carve it out with this separate competency?
Yeah, and Andy McAfee at MIT has done a lot of studying of when factories were first electrified, and factories had chief electrification officers. So
do they still have them?
Probably some do. maybe they have them in some other places around the world. But one of the things that we've talked a little bit about is this notion of if the chief digital officer might be one that's transitional or catalytic. Where are some of the other areas that you see needing that kind of area of focus, in the role of a C-level executive? Perry, do you have any?
I mean, one of the things I've done at Harvard with our team has really been thinking about the role that analytics and data play in thinking about your online efforts and really your efforts overall and how you measure online versus offline. And I think that's been an undervalued competency in education. For some good reasons. We knew pretty much what we were doing. We knew how we did deliver, and there were limited ways you could deliver the 4-year residential education model, speaking specifically at the college or to the graduate model. Now that I think those models are being reevaluated in some situations, I think there's a real opportunity to look at data. Also with edX and HarvardX. edX is an initiative we launched back in 2012. To really think differently about how students learn, to share learning with the world, and to take that data and transform how we do on-campus learning. So now we have 1 million students registered, I think, in every country in the world or close to. So now that we have those big data sets, what can we learn from them? And then what can we apply back to what we do on and off campus? So I see it moving in the direction of analytics and data.
How about?
I think data is very important. Museums have always been good at collecting kind of visitor attendance figures, development numbers, things like that. But we are now seeing data that we hadn't seen before. For example, for the first time, because we took control of our audio guide content, we can now track where you go in the museum. We had kind of no idea before. We're just guesses. So we're able to see, do you turn right or left? Which stops are you going to? And one of the things we learned, for example, is that the second most listened to audio guide or requested audio guide is Chinese. And that means now we can, we didn't actually we can now see that and see what stops they're going to, what they're interested in. That kind of thing is very important.
And that's something that you're actively involved in, then,
Yeah,
is monitoring those
it's
analytics?
all,
That's
it's all digital and technology
yeah.
that can make that possible.
Yeah. Well, if we're already in the realm of kind of big data, I think we're about to move into the realm of bigger data as this Internet of Things starts to happen, and some of the capabilities that you just started to talk about there really get expanded out quite considerably. Is that something that's on your radar there with all those objects?
We have a media lab at the museum, so we're playing with things like 3D printing and Google Glass and all of that. But we're also experimenting with iBeacon to see if in the future might every piece of art have a beacon on it so that you can interact with it, and you can. Does every piece of art have a hashtag? Does every piece of art? Those are kinds of things that you can do. But at the same time, we have to be very careful. And we want to, just as in education, there's a value in just sitting in a classroom, 10 students and a professor. There's value in just you and a piece of art, no technology. So balancing that is difficult.
How about at Harvard? Is that starting to get into conversations there in your world?
Yeah, it's definitely what we think about as we see, increasingly students fully immersed in things like quantified self. Like, I don't know if you wear one of these bands, but, to track sort of how many steps you take or how many hours you sleep. But I think as these, it's called personal data exhaust streams, start to, exist more and more, is there more we should know about students? Should we know that if you put a student in a dorm 10 minutes from a class and he or she walks every day to class, their grades tend to go up because they've had that level of physical activity? Is that something we ever track? Probably not. But the idea that data is we're now creating data that's knowable, that could potentially improve or transform the educational experience. And certainly when you think of Internet of Things and how it impacts learning spaces, that's something I think we'll be all in on. So thinking about, how could a room that you're in understand from temperature, from number of people, from, devices on the phone, from an app on the phone, understand either the level or the interest or the movement of learners in the room, I think could be transformative.
Well, you talked about kind of transforming education there, and one of the things that certainly has been transforming education in the last 3 or so years is this idea of online learning and MOOCs, and both of you have kind of educational contexts in your roles. You're saying that you think the dust has started to settle finally in that area. How is that movement starting to filter in or really playing a role in your day-to-day job?
Well, I think, as MOOCs went from, so you guys are all no doubt familiar with the idea of the hype cycle. I think we spoke last year that just about the peak of the hype cycle was, mid-2013. And now it started to go back more to sort of sane, dust-settled levels of how we think about, online education as part of an overall portfolio of ways we connect and engage with people. So in terms of my role, I sit on the strategy team helping think about, as we bring these courses online, what's the social media program? How do we partner with everyone from the course developers to the faculty members? And how do we take the social data about the learners and incorporate that back into discussion groups or what we learn? The Alumni Association has done a terrific initiative around Harvard X for alumni. So again, 375,000 alumni worldwide. And they're very eager to know. Alumni always say they want to come back and connect with the intellectual content of the institution. What do we know about them when they're connecting back? What did they learn? What did they engage with most? So those are two main areas of overlap right now.
How about at the Met?
We're doing initiatives like we're trying to get, instead of just helping those 300,000 students who are here, we want to help teachers and students around the world. So working with places like Khan Academy and others to see how we can partner to get our content seen.
That's great. So I think we're going to turn it over to questions now. If folks have any questions or comments for the panel here. Do we have any microphones in the room? Looks like we might have one in the back. We've got a question from Ken there.
First, just an observation for Eric and Sri, maybe. Are you familiar with what National Geographic has done digitally with a magazine? Have you seen what they've done?
Yes.
I say that because I've been a National Geographic subscriber since the 60s. I just moved and gave away all of those copies, but to UCLA. But one of the, but because I've become completely, I totally read the magazine on my iPad now, and the difference is night and day in terms of what they're delivering. I don't know. I mean, I'm also a Harvard Business School graduate, so I don't know what you're doing on the Harvard Business Review, but that is to me the ultimate experience, so much a better experience that I totally stopped getting the printed magazine completely. But I did have a question for Perry, which I've actually broadened. we've talked before, because I teach at UCLA, about trying to go online with that course, which would work very well online, that kind of thing. And I found from, I think, stuff that you sent me, that state universities absolutely don't do this compared to the private universities like Harvard. Do you see that in the future? Do you think the state institutions or the public institutions will embrace that in the future?
I absolutely think everyone is taking a hard look at the role of online education and what they do, whether it's going to be fully online or a hybrid model. I don't see a scenario where any institution of, even K-12 or higher education is completely going to eschew that learning. I also think we're going to stop thinking about it. Do you remember, and this is still a problem for me where I bank, so if you call your online banking, they're like, oh no, we can only help you with your password. We don't know anything about actual banking. And if you go into your bank and you have a question about the website, they're like, oh no, you have to talk to the website people. There's some industries where they still are very divided, and I think education is starting to come together. So the online learning outfit doesn't sit in some separate department in some separate building anymore. It's going to inform the on-campus learning and exploration. And similarly, what's working on campus is going to feed what's going online. So I think that separation is going to end, and it is going to be more broadly within state
the sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Part of the reason, though, that public universities haven't had a chance to get in on it, because it's so expensive.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it sounds like it's all free, but it's not. The amount of investment you have to put in, amount of money is...
and time. I think that's been probably the biggest surprise factor for Harvard faculty engaged, is the amount of time it takes to pull together one of these programs.
It's more time to create an online course than an in-person one.
Yeah, but last year you did say something that I think knocked me out, which was, I think you had a professor who taught 10 students, but he had 49,000 online or something.
This was the Princeton professor who did that, And he
that
said there's the same amount of problems, the same percentage of problem students that you have in 10 students are there in 49,000, so you can imagine.
I'm not sure I want that.
And he said it took all his time to teach that class. He said you can completely underestimate how long it takes to teach an online class compared to an in-person class.
I think we're definitely in kind of the second wave of online education in terms of the efficacy. There was definitely that hype, peak MOOC, I guess we'd say, about a year ago. But you're also starting to see programs like Udacity, which had done some pretty novel partnerships in the state school sector. I think it was San Jose State, and really seeing some pretty poor results from those pilot programs, and really causing them to pivot to potentially a different kind of more of a B2B model. So I think you're starting to see, and obviously there's been a lot of drop-offs where you get these amazing numbers of 49,000 people starting the course, but then the number of completions is obviously quite a bit less than that. So I think you're seeing some appropriate kind of rethinking and some adjustments to make those more effective ways for learning. 10%?
I think 10 is high.
5 to 7.
Saying a 5 to 7 or 5 to 10% completion rate there.
I think 10 is very high.
Yeah.
Yes, in the back we've got a question.
Hi, my name is Paul Ballo. I'm with MasterCard. And Sri, I had a question for you. You had said that you were tracking people in the museum. Are you using iBeacon technology?
No, we're working on, our Media Lab is experimenting with iBeacon. I was talking about in the audio guide. It's an iPod Touch, so you can tell which direction you're going, that kind of stuff.
And can you elaborate on how it's going with iBeacon in the labs, or that's all just new?
It's very early. I mean, some museums have been ahead of us in doing things. The big problem at a big building like the Met is the internal wayfinding is an issue, and that's something we are hoping to crack in the next couple of years.
Well, if you want to trade stories, we're actually at the Yankee Stadium, so I'm happy to share with you what we're doing. So.
Thank you.
Looks like we have a question all up over there.
Hi, this question is for Sri. It's two-part. I'm wondering if you guys, you have all this amazing video content. Are you creating separate strategies for platforms like YouTube, separate from your proprietary sites, and Instagram and Vine? And then secondarily, how are you measuring the success of all of this content? Is it view-based? Is it engagement? What's most important to you?
Well, I would say that I'll use the opportunity to talk about kind of the importance of visuals at the Met. Obviously, because of the art, we have enormous traction with our visual platforms. In fact, we found that Pinterest, which we joined much later than Twitter, We have almost as many followers, 600,000 something followers on Twitter, and almost the same on Pinterest. But we find that there's more engagement. People who come from Pinterest stay longer, are more loyal, kind of go deeper than any other platform. So the visual stuff is really important to us, both stills as well as video. And there's a plug. I hope you'll all check out our Instagram feed. It's just been nominated for a Webby, and it's all at Met Museum on all the platforms. And what we are trying to do is to think about smarter ways to use our video. We are obviously trying to push things to the website, but we're very comfortable putting all our videos on YouTube and getting them seen out there, putting them on other channels as well, and seeing what works. And when in terms of what we're looking at is engagement, what kind of responses we get. It's very common to get more than 100 comments on a post for us on Facebook and things like that. But it's also to see what people are saying. We think that the comments have, and the idea of sharing the content has an important role in people deciding where to, how to spend their vacations, or, if they're coming to New York, what to do. So we try to capture that, and when people say positive things, we want to amplify that as much as possible. So we talk back, we connect whenever we can, and that's part of what we're trying to do. And this is all new for us. We're learning. Those of you in the for-profit space obviously have much more experience, but we're working on it.
Anything on video for you, Barry, or?
We just look at video not only within our site, but also across platform. And it's interesting, we've been experimenting with taking existing video assets and repurposing them far more than shooting originals. So, we've found that, using the Instagram 15-second, I think it is, clips of our existing video have been hugely popular. And
that's amazing. Question back there.
Hi, Judy Simmons from DDG. You both mentioned apps or opportunity for collecting data, either tracking students on campus or throughout the museum. And I'm just wondering, when you think about new directions and collecting data, where does the privacy conversation come in, or does it?
It starts with a privacy conversation. I think absolutely, particularly, higher education is regulated with FERPA, and you want to be very, very careful before you make any decisions in that direction. I think these are things we're looking to clarify. These are behaviors students are engaging in themselves. And we're wondering at what point, if ever, should the institution be looking at and leveraging and making decisions informed by that data. But what we're noticing is that people are creating and sharing that data today. So the question is, how does that fit into institutional digital strategy?
Yeah, and we're obviously very careful about privacy. And when we say tracking what people are doing, it's just what the machines are doing, not individual people, and trying to get broader trends from that.
Another question there in the back.
Hi, Christophe Jamay, DDG. Being that New York is a locus for museums and that kind of culture, is there a sense of collaboration among those institutions, or is it more competitive because you're trying to get a share of somebody's time to be exposed to knowledge and culture? What kind of relationships do you have with the other museum-like institutions in the city, and which other institutions do you think are doing a great job alongside the Met?
Sure. I would say, having been in the media space for a long time, I used to spend all my time on panels about the future of media, and now I'm on panels about future of museums. And I was on one on yesterday and one on tomorrow. And so there's a lot of everybody's in the same boat. We're trying to attract more audience, but also a different kind of audience, better, more diverse kinds of folks coming. So I think we're also all trying to understand how technology affects what we do. So in terms of working together, our Media Lab hosts a very regular museum meetup where we kind of talk together about how technology is affecting what we do. We're trying things, and so we're always looking for partners both in museums and outside who will want to work with us to try new things. The kinds of folks that are doing really interesting things, the Tate in London, MoMA, are examples of places where they're doing new things. I was at the Louvre recently, and where most of us are using iPod Touches and other kinds of audio guides, they're using a Nintendo DS as the audio guide. And it's very different. It's something that, Nintendo came and did a partnership with them. So what we have to do is to be looking at ideas, but also sharing. And one of the things that's happened is that Bloomberg, the philanthropy part of the Bloomberg company, is very involved in doing grants in the mobile space. And so we meet regularly to share what's working, what's not working. But as Perry said, to hear from non-museum people. So we had a presentation where we heard from someone at Disney and also someone at Songza and Google, just to hear about different ideas that we can then borrow from.
I guess, go ahead.
Just one thing to add, the idea of the Epic Mix. I don't know how many of you are skiers. So you can get the app where you can go from mountain to mountain, and you get credit from Vail, and you get credit from Aspen, you get credit from, so I think that's a similar idea to, how could you think about badging or gamifying across museums the cultural experience of New York, and you have an unbelievable playground to execute.
And then, of course, the Museum Mile is actually there's a physical thing that we try to do more things digitally. There's something coming up where we'll be doing more kind of together to celebrate the mile.
That's great. I think I saw another question from the middle of the room. No? Oh, over here. John.
Hi. Sorry, I was in the other room, so if you already addressed this, then don't bother answering it. But I was at the Andreessen Horowitz Summit a couple of months ago in San Francisco, and Mark and Ben were there, and they've been very good at kind of predicting things in companies and whatever. So I asked them what the next great disruption is, and I was thinking more it'd be payments or something, and Ben actually said that the next great disruption will be in the education system, the university system. He said, verbatim what he said was that the Ivies and those types of schools will probably be fine for some time because you need that and whatever, but that whole middle tier in the next 5 to 10 years will kind of get wiped out, and the MOOCs and all these like online universities will kind of both because of the cost of it and just the flexibility and the nature of it would kind of allow for all these universities online to take over. What is your take on that, given that you guys are from that world?
I mean, there's no doubt that higher education is at a tremendous inflection point, perhaps, as great as the initial inflection point when the university systems were first created with the Bologna model. So I think we are at a tremendous transformative time. I do think that a lot of the predictions are tied to these assumptions that physical is expensive and online is free. That completion rates will be the same across all. So I think the smart institutions are the ones who are trying to disrupt themselves before the competitors come and disrupt them. That's why Harvard and MIT joined together to make an investment in edX, because I do think that there are significant threats and opportunities for higher education right now. But I would absolutely echo and agree that comment that this is the next, we've operated with the same general assumptions for over 600 years about university, and it is ripe for disruption, but I don't predict that as doom and gloom. I predict that as a tremendous opportunity.
I used to say this about MIT and Harvard. No two institutions compete more, fiercely on, because of their physical and fiscal proximity and intellectual proximity. And if they can get together, and they have gotten together, that tells you that everyone needs to pay attention to what's happening. And I think it's great that lots of folks are paying attention. Ben Horowitz, who's a Columbia grad, is on the Columbia Board of Trustees. So you can imagine having someone like that means there's a lot of opportunities for Columbia to be at the forefront of thinking of new ways of doing this.
Great. Looks like that's it for questions. So I'd like to thank do we have one more over here? I'm sorry, I didn't see that yet.
Good morning. Thanks to all of you for a great panel this morning. Elizabeth Scott, Lincoln Center. I've got a question specifically for you, Perry. We've heard a lot about the creation of CDO roles being very different from institution to institution. I'm curious to hear from you what Harvard thought it was creating in creating your role and what it actually is now. Because when I look at an institution like Harvard, there is incredible competencies is an understatement on the digital front in so many different areas of the organization, from your informational sciences area to the Berkman Center to the edX to your alumni services. Do you actually manifest your role unifying activities or sharing best practices or or cross-pollinating, or is it all of the above?
Yes. So I think when I first joined, the problem they were trying to solve was we need to fix our websites. They're broken and people are complaining about them. And our websites meant everything from the way alumni give money to students applying for admission to even some of the core infrastructure educational experiences. And we need to fix that. And it started really with the public affairs and communications, thinking about how do we fix our public-facing assets. The role, and there was a director of digital strategy. And then the role expanded to CDO in 2011 because I think there was a shared understanding of all these things are connected and tied. And in an organization in which we can only influence and cannot control, it's very important to have a center of excellence for guidelines and strategy and approaches. So our group ended up doing, how digital is sort of the back door to many of these other things. So our group ended up doing the first ever Harvard University logo 374 years after its founding. It was astonishing enough. So you wouldn't think of that as a digital job, but it was one of the areas in which we realized that we were spending a lot of time, and President Faust had the wonderful quote, we don't manifest, academic freedom and diversity of thought in 21 shades of crimson. We can pick one. So that's one of the things we've really, managed to do is sort of both a look and feel standpoint, but also then think about what's people's experience of Harvard in the digital realm, and then how do we move things forward? I think a lot of CDOs, where I see the role fail or have challenges, is people start very much on the macro level, and if there's one piece of advice I would share with people in the room, of governance and strategy and these long documents and decks and postcards and placemats that are how things are going to work, where I believe very strongly that you have to start with a few critical projects that solve actual business problems for the institution. You start with the problems, and then the organization, the strategy, and what you do boils up from there. You can talk matrix reporting and collaboration on paper all you want, but until you facilitate that exchange of hostages from IT or whatever other group you're working with, then you don't really have shared skin in the game.
Just a plug for Perry. She wrote, I think, 3 or 4 terrific blog posts for hbr.org. So if you go to hbr.org and search for her name, you'll find them where she talks a lot about that kind of how to work within the organization, how to start and identify some of those key projects, mistakes to avoid. So if you're interested in diving a little bit more into some of the science that she just dropped there, you can find it there. So are there any other questions from the group here? No? Okay, we'd like to thank the panel. Thank you so much, and look forward to the rest of the day.
Thank you.